Returning today to share what they've learned from partnering with business leaders to build healthier conditions for performance are my colleagues Carol Henriquez, Anna Grome, and Mike Lewis. To help you get to know our panelists a little better, Michelle has shared a few blogs in the chat that they've authored. And with that, I'll pass the mic to Anna Grome to get us started.
Thank you, Katie, and hi, everybody. It's great to be with you again. So just to orient us a bit to what we're focusing on today, in part one of the webinar that I think many of you joined, we really focused on how people can understand the organizational system. Today, we're going to be building on that and talking about how leaders can actually shape the system once there's a really clear and holistic understanding. So, this session today is really focused on moving from insight to action. We're going to share some practical frameworks with you and look at some real examples. And we're also going to spend a little bit of time on how AI is starting to reshape organizational design. Our hope is that you leave with some ideas and also some more confidence in how to think about these issues and talk with your teams about them. So, I want to go back to just a quick recap of what we discussed in part one. You'll probably remember that we introduced the Thrive model as a lens for organizational assessment and diagnosis. Thrive, as you remember, includes six organizational needs: purpose, potential, capability, connection, security, and resources. And those needs are always in tension with one another. The goal of in healthy and high performing organizations is not necessarily to maximize all of them at once, but to manage them in balance. And what's helpful about that model is it gives leaders a way to make sense of what's happening in their current state, align around what they're seeing, and also get clear on what actually needs to change to move the organization to its desired future. So today we want to build on that, and we're going to show how assessment can directly inform design or shaping the system.
Great.
Okay. I'm going to toss it over to Carol, and she's going to share one of the frameworks.
Thanks, Anna. So you can see this little spider. It looks like a spider graph that Anna shared. We call this our performance levers framework. You may be familiar with other systems-oriented frameworks that are similar. And if you think about like what we've shared around Thrive, Thrive is a systems-oriented framework. And then you can tell based on that that we are quite systems-oriented. And we think of organizations both at the diagnostic level as a system, and then when we're figuring out what actions we take, we also think of that really holistically and really systemically. If you think about all these performance levers, strategy, systems and processes, structures, roles, talent, leadership, and culture, each of those, when you pull that lever, that's why we think of these as levers. When you pull that lever, if you think about a machine, all the other levers respond as well. So much like Thrive, there's some balancing action that happens when you think about the actions that you're taking. I share that very engineering and physics orientation because that's really what we're always looking at. So often we're working with clients and they're thinking, okay, we have this refinement or a new strategy that we have to put in place. So when we're now clicking down to the level of, okay, we've understood what's going on from a Thrive perspective, from how you're going to actualize or where your strengths are from an actualization perspective and where some of the refinements or changes that you might need to make are. Now we're saying, okay, what does that look like? Because you have this new strategy. So, which of these levers is going to be a primary lever that you have to pull? And then what do we need to pay attention to? So, if you find that your new business strategy requires that you have a new enterprise operating system, and that's or like a technology-based operating system, that's a pretty common thing that we discover is that organizations want to be more integrated, so they're putting in an integrated operating system. And sometimes when that happens, they will have unintended consequences. There's all kinds of opportunity for doing it because it creates all those great integrations across functions. It forces, there's a forcing function around building the right processes. It really often has the potential for aligning skills with the future state because you need to be able to perform according to the new model. And processes are pretty much a big part of the realignment. But sometimes there are unintended consequences in terms of like what's the impact on people and talent? What's the impact on the culture? What might happen as a result, right? We're trying to have more integration across the organization. And in some cases, we find that there are misses around that integration that we have to pay attention to. So the point here is don't forget, this is super, super simple framework to use, but it is also um, uh, used with great complexity because every organization is highly complex. We talked about complexity last time. So don't forget when you're sort of working your way around this system to think about all the levers of performance. And we pay a lot of attention to that when we're working with our clients. And I shared the systems um, example because I think that's a pretty common uh, challenge that organizations face is making sure that people and leadership and culture don't get out of whack when we're implementing a new system. But all these are true. A little bit of what we're going to talk about more today is thinking about your whole operating model, and there's an emphasis there on processes, talent, and roles. So we're going to talk more about that in a minute, but I thought I'd toss this to Anna real quick and have you just share, I think, a really great example that we're actually in the middle of working on with a client. You introduced it in our last session, but I think you can talk a little bit more about the I mean, not the operating model, the performance levers, and
Yeah.
how they're playing out in that client's.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did introduce this in the last session, and admittedly, I think I did a super quick run through of it. But to remind you of this example, this was an organizational assessment we did with an architectural firm. The founders originally came to us saying, they needed something pretty specific. They said, we want updated role descriptions because we need to make sure that we are less involved as founders in day-to-day operations, and we need to start transitioning from being a founder-led firm to one that is, led by others and is able to be sustainable over time. So we assessed the organization using the Thrive model. And through that, it was very interesting, became very clear that yes, role descriptions and role clarity was a need, and it's something that is holding the organization back. But we also were able to see the system in a much bigger and broader and richer way. And what we learned from that was the firm has tremendous strengths related to a sense of purpose, a really strong brand. They have a very strong creative identity. They're known for design excellence, but there were tensions. It was still very heavily dependent on the founders for any sort of operational and financial decision making. People felt fearful and unable and not empowered to be able to question or to make their own decisions. And that dependence on the founders was really limiting the future state vision that the founders had for this organization. It was constraining the development of future leaders. It was slowing scalability. It was weakening safe and open and candid dialogue. And it was just creating a lot of strain across the system. There was also a significant gap between kind of the external promise of the firm and the way that employees were experiencing the firm internally. Very high turnover that was consuming a lot of time and energy that could have otherwise been invested in growth. So the real question after we did this assessment was not what job descriptions do we need, but it was what has to change within this organization if the firm is going to grow and become sustainable over the long term without losing what has made it really special and successful in the first place. So this is where the work began to move from assessment to design or to shaping the system. So once we had this assessment and diagnosis, the work we did was to translate the findings into a future state blueprint. And what's important here is the blueprint wasn't just a list of recommendations, but it was really grounded in a few things. It was grounded in the priorities identified by the leadership team and the vision of where they wanted the firm to go. It was grounded in the current state findings from the assessment, and then, of course, grounded in our recommendations based on our experience in organizational performance and design. So the blueprint was really helpful in getting all of us aligned on the priority initiatives to move the firm forward to its desired future. And examples of what was in the blueprint are things like defining and communicating new core values, designing the future state operating model, revamping core workflows, evolving the structure, clarifying roles, reviewing and developing talent, and monitoring cultural health as well. So this is where, as we started moving from the blueprint to beginning to activate some of these recommendations, this is one of the places where the performance levers framework that Carol just described became really valuable. So if we go to the next slide, once the assessment helped us understand what was out of balance in the firm's system, the performance levers framework really is giving us a practical way to start designing the future state very holistically. And I do want to point out this work is still very much underway. So a lot of even what I'm showing is very much a work in progress. But what it's doing is helping us have a different type of design conversation with the leadership team of this firm. So instead of going straight to what are the roles and how do we design roles and responsibilities and decision rights, we're able to discuss and explore broader questions with them, like what is the strategy that this organization is trying to enable? What roles and accountabilities need to exist? What are the work processes that need to underpin the operating model? What kind of culture and leadership model is going to support that vision? And what are the systems and structures that need to be in place for the organization to perform in the way in the direction where it wants to go? So there's tremendous power in this framework and just really pushing us to have the conversations that enable us to think very systemically about the design of the organization going forward. I'm going to actually
Thank
toss it back to Carol again here.
Yeah. So Anna's our guinea pig right now. She's sharing this. This is such a valuable example. We wanted to share it and it's very recent. So because I'm old and my memory's not great, I love to like share recent examples. Recency effect is a great, is a great thing for me. But I thought I'd share a little bit about how we think about operating models. So that word is a little bit overused because we can mean a lot of different things. Sometimes it's like, how do the financials align with the business outcomes? Sometimes we think of that as an operating model. But if you click down on like going from the overall financials like revenue, EBITDA, those kinds of external financials, then how do you build the organization that can achieve that? And one thing that we've learned over the years that this framework, if you just look at it, it's highly integrated and it's similar to both Thrive and performance levers. It's about how do we ensure that we treat the whole organization as a system. In this case, it's that all the functions, all the business units, all the different aspects of the business need to be integrated in some way or another. And that really varies by organization and need. But pretty much every organization has three different types of activity groupings, is what we call these. And there are many activity groupings in an organization, but basically three types, and they deliver different types of outcomes. So when we're looking for innovation, new, something that has to be responding to what's going on in the external marketplace, that has one set of characteristics in terms of the work that needs to be done. So these are activity groupings that we call centers of expertise. We're all familiar with centers of expertise. At the root, a center of expertise is a function or a set of activities that provide and bring technical expertise to the organization. It could be overall business unit could be a center of expertise as a business unit, or it could be down at the functional level. A business unit could be a center of expertise. So this is also a framework that can work at a micro level and an individual team. It could work at a functional level, it could work at a business unit level, and it could work at an enterprise level. I love the word fractal, and this is kind of a little bit of a fractal framework. Anna's laughing because she knows it's true. And then another set of activities or activity groupings are what we think of as shared services, and we all know that term as well, but at the root of what a shared services function is, it's designed to increase, in terms of the outcomes, designed to increase efficiency and effectiveness and to decrease cost. So we know lots of different activities, different functions within an organization that are designed to do that. Sometimes they're efficient and effective customer service functions that you can think of as like a call center or a group of activities where the work is done the same way every single time. Financial processing are often shared services. And at the enterprise level, we even think of our corporate functions like HR, IT, legal, finance as being shared functions, shared services functions. So we're also trying to drive efficiency and effectiveness into those functions as well. And then the third activity grouping is our customer relationship functions. Those can be anywhere from sales to a person out delivering value at a client site. It's like everything in between. It's the part of the organization that reaches out into the client or the customer and brings the services of the centers of expertise and shared services to bear for that client. So they broker services, they bring them forward. So you can think of them as being highly in touch with the customer, and the outcomes that they drive are customer intimacy, effectiveness, deepened customer relationships, and customer orientation. So that's how we think of the framework. And basically, this framework is all about how do you design structures, processes, and roles to achieve the business strategy. And then we wrap around the culture, the leadership and governance, and the processes and the systems that need to go along with it. So I'm clicking down a little from the performance levers because this framework gets into what we're thinking of as organization design. When we think of organization design, we do not think of structures and roles only. It's not boxes and wires. It's all this stuff. It's like how do all these activities come together to deliver value supported by the internal culture, leadership, and systems. Fair? Um, I can't hear you because we're on a one-way webinar, so maybe
I
saying
felt
make your
everybody nodding when
you
you
you feel
answered.
everybody nodding. Thanks,
Yep,
Anna.
very
So
good.
I'm going to jump back to Anna and ask Anna to share an example of where we have used this kind of a framework in an operating model, which is the same client that she was talking about before.
Yep. Okay. So the same client we're talking about, the architecture firm. So we are literally in the midst of designing their future state operating model. So I wanted to kind of give you a little glimpse into that, and we can talk about kind of how it maps to the framework that Carol just shared. So we are, first of all, we're shaping the operating model design around what was informed by the assessment, but also a set of design requirements that we aligned on with the leadership team. So the question was, what do we need to ensure that this operating model enables for the business? And what we aligned on is a pretty lengthy list of the things that it needs to enable that you can see here. But things like it needs to enable profitable growth, it needs to enable client centricity, design excellence. One of the really key things it needs to enable is distributed leadership with clear decision rights. And this is a significant shift for this firm where decision making has really resided with the founders to a fault. So this is something that we're working to ensure that the operating model will enable. They also really want it to enable measurable accountability and long-term financial stability. So if we go to the next slide, what I wanted to show you here is this is the visual that we are currently creating that is reflecting the future state operating model. And so what you'll see is at the center of this operating model is the client. So everything that the firm is doing is, of course, in support of serving their clients. And around that sits the firm's core capabilities. So things like project management, design, interior design, those are core capabilities of the firm that are integrated through a new role and a new set of services called the lead design consultant role. And that's really an integrator role, someone that is connecting um, client leadership with delivery and with growth and bringing all those services to bear for the clients. You'll also see kind of across the bottom are the shared services that Carol talked about in the operating model to drive efficiency, things like HR, IT, marketing. And then on the left-hand side, these reflect the different markets that the firm is intending to serve in the future. And this is really the kind of the relationship management set of activities where you've got business development who are reaching out into these markets, identifying opportunities, and being the broker of the services that the firm has to offer for those clients. So again, this is you'll see a very different answer than let's update job descriptions, and I'll keep going back to that since that was the original ask. But this is one step we are taking to help them visualize what their future state operating model is. I think
Um,
just
oh,
one of
sorry.
the other quick points, and I'll toss it back to you, Carol, is like I think for a big point for me is assessment that we did early on didn't just diagnose the problem or the set of challenges and tensions, but it really is shaping the design. Um, and then the performance levers framework is really helping us kind of build toward the future state to support this firm's growth and sustainability.
One thing I wanted to say, Anna, is if we just like draw the direct connection, just because
Mhm.
it sort of starts to bring it to life. If you
Mhm.
look at those four capability areas, those deep areas of expertise, at the enterprise level, those are centers of expertise,
Yep.
right? Project management, construction supervision, interior design, and design and engineering. Those would be centers of expertise at the highest level. Now, if you
Mhm.
click down and you start designing each of those, they probably also have a shared services component, an expert component, and a relationship component. So I'm just emphasizing
Yep.
that point
Mhm.
about the ability to click down and look and sort of expand your view around each function. And the reason that I said that is because, as Anna said and I said, those shared services functions that are along the bottom here, and in general, what I shared as the corporate functions. If you think about HR, and I'm guessing like some portion of you live in the world of HR, if you think about the human resources function, at the organization level, the reason we centralize or have a single HR function is because we want to be efficient and effective in how we deliver some standard services and attention to our clients. If you click down and you design HR, many of you probably know and live in either shared services parts of HR or expert functions, COE. So I just wanted to emphasize that point because I don't want it to be confusing because each one of these can expand and the operating model serves to do that. So I'm about to share another example that sort of highlights that. Michelle, if you will advance the slide. Sorry, that took a long time, but I just wanted to start to help this come to life and be clear. Um, so this is a client that I have been working with for, I mean, Tier 1's been working with for about 3 years now. And the very, very first thing we did was a Thrive assessment and a set of recommendations because what this organization was trying to do is double in revenue and EBITDA within 10 years. So it was a big ask. It's not a new company. I mean, this company is 75 years old, 70, 75 years old. Its global parent is even older. But in the US, I mean, so this is a North American business of a global company. And so they've been growing at a normal pace. And suddenly there was this aggressive growth objective. So we came in to say, what are you going to need to do to set the organization up to scale? when we dove down in and we did the Thrive assessment and then we looked at the performance levers, we learned or we sort of extracted that there were two major strategies that were going to get them to their growth objective. One was to expand their products and services, and one was to expand their markets, whether it be geographic markets or new sort of industry markets that they might enter into. So we zeroed in on that. And so the operating model you can see is driven by those two objectives. It looks very different if you think about what Anna just shared, because this company is different. All companies are different. So we were oriented around the strategy just as Anna was with the client that she just shared. And then um, understanding the framework, you can see here that those strategies had expert functions within them, and then each of those other colored boxes is another center of expertise that was trying to drive that strategy. And along the way had relationship components. A lot of the places where you see the arrows, they're connector roles that are either relationships that are internal, customer or client relationships that are internal, or connect to the customer. And then underneath, you can see this foundational, we called them foundational supporting functions. These were the shared services functions that lived at the corporate level. So we wanted to share slightly different kinds of example because it really is unique to whatever the organization's objectives are. And then I'll share a little bit more because I want you to see how this then connects to processes and roles. So Michelle, if you'll just advance one more slide. This is an eyesore example, but if you look at the slides to the left, one of them is the product and service expansion objective, and the other is the market expansion objective. That second slide, while you can't see it in detail, it's an architecture for each of those strategies that shows where do we start in our organization and how does this work have to move through and integrate across all of our functions. So this is where things become hyper integrated in order to drive the strategy. And that came alive because we clicked down on the operating model and said, okay, how does this have to flow? And how does everything in the organization have to flow together? Then the final piece on the right, the big chart piece is once we click down into each of those functional areas, we then can say, what are the activities that need to be done by these various functions? And from there, we developed roles. So this shows you at a very simple level, we went strategy to processes to roles, and the structure is wrapped around all of that. We also paid very close attention because, as I said, this could be an unintended consequence to what are the implications for culture of an organization that is people have worn a lot of hats. They really value the humility of the organization and working with each other super closely and not having an informality. So we didn't want to lose a lot of that, but we had to get more rigorous. The organization had to get more rigorous and structured so that they could drive greater uh, consistency and scalability. So that is another example. So okay, now I'm going to blow all this up. Well, actually, one more. I just realized I shared this. I'm not going to say much about it, but as I said, we started working with this organization 3 years ago, and we've worked with several of the functions as you click down to design the operating model for that function and then to build out the structures, roles, and processes there. We're working right now to build out the supply chain function. So this is the operating model for that. But as I said, it's a click down, meaning that it's a fractal and it requires its own attention and its own design to ensure that there's an integrated supply chain business that actually can scale because it couldn't have before. It didn't have the processes, systems, structures, and roles. Cool. But all that said, AI is really like blowing our minds a little bit because now we're saying there are all these issues in organizations that are going to arise and opportunities that are going to arise from an AI perspective. And we have a lot of these questions, and our clients are starting to ask a whole lot of these questions about what is going to be the implication of AI for our org design. Anna, can you share a little bit about some of those?
Yeah, and I will just preface all of this with we would also love to hear what sorts of questions you're wrestling with related to AI and the implications for org design. But some of the things that we've been hearing about are things like um, how do we design effective human AI teams within our organization? So there's kind of like that teaming and collaboration question. How will AI reshape core workflows and work processes? How will AI reshape decision making? What are the activities that AI will own versus what the human will own? And how will AI change the capabilities and skills that humans need going forward? There's questions around systems and data and operating rhythms and how those need to be adjusted and matured in a meaningful way. And what impact will it have on our structure? How will it redefine roles and how, like, what will the implications be for the culture and trust and transparency? So there's a whole bunch of questions related to the implications of AI on org design. And maybe some of these sound familiar to you, but would also love for you to put in the chat any of the additional questions that are coming up. But I know we have Mike Lewis on the call who is a guru with a lot of these sorts of questions, and so I'm gonna turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, I mean, let's just look at the top left one here, and how do we design effective human AI teams? Maybe if we can go to the next slide, let's chat about that a little bit. It's helpful for me if we kind of share a vocabulary about how we at Tier 1 think about AI proficiency distribution in an organization, but also in individual departments. So just as an exercise, I just want to run through how we bucket levels of proficiency so that later, as we're talking about the Thrive model and how this locks or maps into all of that, y'all can understand the distinctions of sort of what I'm talking about. So we put it in four buckets. There's the L0. This might sound negative if you read disengaged or performative. That's not necessarily bad. For instance, my wife comes to mind first when I'm thinking about this category. She's a nurse. She works with patients all day. She's not allowed to put any patient information into any AI system, really. I mean, and there's no problem with that. Some of the highest performers in an organization, it may be a, hey, it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of situation with some people, and they might not be, they're bringing $40 million a year in the door. Don't touch it, or maybe we're talking about frontline workers, but also you might have people nodding along, attending workshops, saying they use it. That would be the disengaged group. So there's that bucket. Then we go to L1, and this is really what everyone thinks about when we talk about an AI worker. It's what everyone has in mind. It's almost like the baseline. It's just kind of mirrors the average experience. I've used ChatGPT a lot, or maybe I have Gemini or Claude and I love it and I get a lot done with it and I couldn't live without it. You might kind of think, great, that person's the pinnacle. No, that's an L1 in our mind. Just someone who speeds up their work, knows a few tricks. You notice there's just to the right of L1, there's like a dashed line. We see this as a chasm. And it is really, this is the hardest jump, L1 to L2. And I will point out, maybe we just skip L2 for a second and let's talk about L3. L3 is your technical builder. These are the people who, I mean, they probably work in a dark room with a bunch of computers with flashing lights, and they know how to
You,
build.
Mike, it's you.
It's me. It's me. I'll say,
We put Mike in a dark room.
yeah, yeah, no, but really, they're the person who can build the tool that drags the entire organization up. I'm gonna tell a story about an L3 project we did next, right after this, just so you get a sense for like how powerful an L3 can be inside of your organization when they can build things that drag everyone up. Think about someone who can build an email triage system that goes in, or think about someone who can build a tool that automatically generates slide decks or proposals or statements of work, or comb through millions of documents to conduct research. Like there's so many things an L3 can do. But what's funny is when we're talking to rooms of people and we talk about a builder, they're imagining an L3. The leaders in organizations are imagining L3s. But the missing middle, the heart of an organization where you get the real work done in individual departments or in local workflows, are the L2s. And what's funny is when we show this and when we go into organizations and we show 0, 1, 2, 3, what's funny is without us even asking, hands go up and people start asking, hey, what would it take for me to become an L2? A lot of people already kind of self-identify as an L1. And it's like, how would I jump that gap? And I'll tell you an L2 story real quick. We were just working with their national they're a big client, and they had a huge problem. We had done 300 separate projects with them. No one really understood all of the work. There was no one human who understood all the work. As a result, a whole bunch of redundant work was being done. It was just almost as much work to figure out what we had done as it was to figure out what needed to be done and how to do it. Anyway, they came to us with a six-figure budget saying, can we build some type of AI agent that can make sense of all of this? And someone in the meeting who was an L2 raised their hand and said, hey, I think I can handle that. 15 minutes later, it was done because they knew about a button inside of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem that could create an agent and just map to a SharePoint folder, and it was done. And they put it in everyone's teams. And that's the power of an L2. They were about to waste hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to build some platform when the tool was already built into the system they had already paid for. That is the power of an L2. Let's go to the next slide. And we're going to look at this chart's making the rounds. Anthropic, the owner of a model called Claude, maybe some of you have heard of, they just released this. And I thought this is a very interesting chart because if you look, the blue is supposed to represent where can AI really help in business now? And the red is representative of observed impact. And I kind of got a giggle out of this chart when I first saw it because I really feel like the whole thing should be blue. Now that you have a framework for understanding the power of an L2 and the power of an L3, if you look at this chart, you can tell they're thinking about L1s when they make this. Here we are talking about agriculture and we're saying, well, you're not really going to see a big impact in agriculture, but you're imagining a farmer in overalls chewing on straw, sitting down typing at ChatGPT. You're not imagining an L2 or an L3 addressing their biggest problems. Why did I giggle when I saw this? We had just put into production a week before this chart came out. We had just put into production an application for a massive agricultural company who came to us and said, our biggest problem is we cannot accurately predict or forecast the prices of these key commodities and inputs and outputs of ours. It was like corn, soybeans, diesel, and all this, and they're just wondering, can AI help? We put an L3 on it. 2 days later, we had a prediction app that used AI to aggregate a whole bunch of weird new types of inputs that weren't really something that traditional code could have done. And it was a week before they're telling us we cannot live without this app. And so that's the difference between thinking about it like, not an insult to farmers. We love them here in the Midwest. But, the difference between a farmer sitting and someone in the enterprise who understands how to automate cognition. All right. Can we go to the next slide?
Mike, that's a great example. Can you just share any of those weak signals you didn't call them weak signals, any of those inputs that wouldn't be traditional inputs that you can normally, because I think that'll be interesting.
Yeah. So traditionally, when you're building a forecasting model, you're sort of limited to formatted outputs. So like you're limited to government agencies that have an API. It's like it's a front door for computers to come in, check your data. So you're limited to like accessible data that's formatted and available for analysis. And there's a lot of disparate signals floating around the internet that weren't really being analyzed. The biggest one that we stumbled onto were prediction markets, which are kind of a new concept. They live in a blockchain and it's people gambling on future prices of things. We were able to nail 30, 60, and 90-day price predictions on almost everything they were concerned about, mostly just by looking at prediction markets. And we could back test it because we could limit our data and then run the analysis forward and then check it against what had happened in the past. We found we were within like 6% everywhere when we used all of those inputs. But we're using an AI with browser control and vision models to analyze things that don't have an API or a way for computers to check that. But imagine like 1,000 things like that. And it was looking at it all and pulling it in. We're running it, I think, once a week. I don't remember how often, but several times a month. Is that helpful, Carol?
Yeah, that's great. Love that.
Great. So now that we've kind of talked through distribution of proficiency within an organization, I want you to realize we're not just talking about a distribution of proficiency in an organization, but as you bust it out by department or studio or division, those distributions will look different. This is just an example that helps us show people what we're talking about when we talk about your center of gravity inside of an organization. So for proficiency distribution, you might imagine a software company is further to the right and it's there's more of a peak to the bell curve, right? And they're going to want a bunch of L2s and a bunch of L3s in a software company. Go all the way to the other side and it's, this is just something we made up as an example, but for retail or manufacturing, maybe the center of gravity is further to the left. Now, I only felt like it was important for me to share this. I know this deviates a little bit from the topic, but I want you all to understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about AI users. I don't just mean people sitting using ChatGPT. I do mean that, but I also mean people who have geeked out with the tools a little bit and understand how to create automations that really speed up their local work. But I also mean the super nerds that, can build a thing that can just drag the entire organization up. And I also mean the people who we've decided, and this is so important, the people who we decided it's okay, we release them from the pressure of feeling like I'm I'm obsolete if I don't get up to speed with this, that I'm going to be left behind. It's not true in every case. And that addresses one of the core sort of the pivot points on the Thrive wheel thing, security. I think we need to call it out for people, and people need to realize where they're expected to be on the spectrum. And then we need to support them not only with giving them the tools, but also a path to moving through the different levels of proficiency. What if we go to the next one? This is an example of an organization that we engaged with and we conducted an assessment. Now, we don't like self-reporting. We don't like if within an organization we just ask a room, how good are you with AI tools? How do we really try to look at, the actual usage. We try to get logs. And in 2024, we did an assessment. You might notice we saw 0 L2 and 1% L3. That's because there was like 2 people who understood how to plug AI into code. Almost everyone was disengaged and a few people who had stumbled onto the tools. Remember, 2024, there really were no L2 tools. All you had was like Chat GPT. I don't even remember if Copilot was around yet. But if we move a year later after some intentional like shift, you can kind of see the bell curve starting to take shape. And this is our aspirational target over to the right for that organization. And, we're on our way. Carol or Anna, did you have any thoughts or questions just at this moment?
Lots, but
Mhm.
Okay.
Mike, how did you set how did you with the clients set that aspirational target? Was it based on like what you shared in the previous slide? And I guess what I'm getting at is like this teaming relationship between AI and human. What's the relationship there?
Yep.
If you could share it.
Yeah. Well, we actually have, this is like just a few slides from a pretty big process that we run organizations through, but there are 3 conversations we have. We have kind of 3 topics, and we have those conversations not only at the org level, but as we zoom into different departments. And so then we kind of average all that out for an org-wide aspirational target. But then, in different areas, like, so if we're talking about frontline manufacturing, it's going to be a very left center of gravity. Most of these people are on a floor, or maybe customer service workers, or, they're not using them. Anna, any thoughts before we push?
I just the only, I'm just trying to like as I think about the theme of this webinar around shaping the system, I mean, clearly AI is a tremendous transformation that I think we're all experiencing right now. And I mean, based on what Mike is describing, there is going to be significant transformation in the work itself and the nature of the work itself as a function of AI. And it has many implications for the way we're designing roles, the way that we're designing our workflows and work processes, the way that we think about our teams and our team structures. So I just wanted to make that connection really explicit that this big shift in our world right now with AI has so many different implications for how we think about shaping our systems. So it's going to be a key lever that I think we're all going to be paying a lot of attention to.
And
Yeah,
let me add
related. Mike and I have been in a conversation. I mean, this clicked down on actual adoption and AI proficiency, but what one of the conversations we're in is one that I've been sort of trying to get closer to, and I don't know when we'll get closer, get a true answer to this. But when we think about work that is value creation work, where a human is the critical component of driving value. It's not necessarily systems dependent. Processes aren't necessarily the critical component. The organization capital itself isn't the most important thing, but the human driving impact and value is the most important thing. When I asked Mike about like what's going to be the impact on value creation work, is AI going to be able to displace that work, take over that work? Because I'm seeing it now, like some of our clients, the people who are doing the knowledge working things that sometimes we think of value creation those are the roles that AI is going to be really good at. But Mike's answer was no, because and I'll say this, the whole pie is going to grow, that as the AI has more capacity, it's going to demand more from the humans. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and let's go to the next slide and then I will wrap up my section of this. But I just have one point I want to make. If we look at this pie and to address your question in a holistic way, right? So if we're looking across these three axes, if we look at purpose and connection, I just want to call out that if purpose shifts, so if there's a new mission, if AI changes what you do, connection must realign or people drift apart. Someone at Tier 1 called out, he's like, man, I'm killing it with AI. I love this guy, by the way. And he said, but I'm starting to feel lonelier than ever. I find I'm working with this robot 6 hours a day. I miss meetings. Who ever would have thought that AI would make people miss meetings? But he's saying that if we look at the potential and security, if potential expands and AI opens new possibilities, security feels threatened. So people feel like they're staring their obsolescence in the face. Or, we have real actual security concerns with data and the clients may be panicking about like, what are you doing with my data? Where are you putting it? This feels AI generated. That's a problem. Last one, capabilities across resources. If the AI increases capabilities by a lot, your resources must either extend or contract to match. And we've observed that when you have this sudden like velocity crash where it's you have this thing that used to take 3 months, oh well, now it's compressed into an hour. It just impacts everything and it can be very disruptive. And so it is very important. And I'm new to the Thrive stuff, as you all know. Within the past 2 weeks, I'm learning all of this, and I'm like, finally, I have language to match what I'm observing everywhere. And these are the real challenges. The real challenge is not picking a platform and making it secure. The real challenge is making it work inside of your giant system. And
Yeah.
that's all I got on this stuff. Y'all take over.
That's all you got.
That's all I
So
got.
we wanted to spend at least the last few minutes hearing from y'all a little bit since we can't see you. We'd love to hear from you. So we have a question. So for you, what questions are surfacing for you around how to shape your organization for greater performance and impact amid continuous transformation? And this is especially in the age of AI. This doesn't have to necessarily be related to AI, but we're really curious about like what challenges you're in as complexity increases and as transformation becomes even more complex.
Hey team, there's a question from Trisha or a comment. Our leaders are wanting to push off the uncomfortable to AI.
Mm.
I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. What's the uncomfortable?
Yep.
Because that could be interpreted in many ways. Really curious there.
Feedback
Mm,
Hmm.
to AI. So
yeah.
I assume like
The diff
AI feedback
the
tools.
difficult conversations,
Hmm.
finding feedback, performance feedback. Hmm.
Meaning having AI tools that provide feedback to people, I guess. Is
Interesting.
that what
Hmm.
you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah.
Uncomfortable June.
Hmm.
Mm. Hmm.
Fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
Where does that fall on the
Sorry.
six things?
Capability and resources.
Hmm. Yeah, I also
I would
think,
ask what makes, and this is like maybe even a silly question because I think it's so common, what makes leaders not want to give people feedback or what makes individuals not want to give people feedback?
That's
yeah, where
interesting.
my head starts going is to the security dimension of the Thrive model and people feeling, kind of that discomfort with it, I think stems from a place probably of fear
Hmm.
in some respects, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
We
And
are
then, I mean, just like thinking future oriented, if we're getting all of our feedback from AI,
yeah.
what is that? Oh, there has been an executive leadership change. I guess that's what you're saying.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
We're
Thanks for
working on
sharing that.
a tool now that actually looks at emails and scans them for is this going to cause a conflict, and then it can hold off from sending it and just hit them back with a message to say like, are you sure because of the personality profile of the receiver, it might land this way? Have you thought about that? And so,
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah.
So
Mm.
Michael commented, all those uncomfortable parts are where AI slop. Love that. AI
Yeah,
slop
I do that.
thrives.
Yeah.
That's
Huh.
a great term. Mike, how effective is AI at giving feedback, or is it slop?
Oh, one of my favorite AI stories is on this exact topic. So I was in my office, and this take about 60 seconds. I was in my office working one day, and my wife and daughter had an argument right outside of my door, and it was making it difficult for me to focus and actually like lock into my work. And so I heard my daughter storm off to the car. My wife was going to go get in the car with her, and I knew it would just escalate in the car. And so I kind of poked my head out of the office and I probably looked irritated and I said, hey, just take it easier on her in the car. I saw it, I got like daggers back and I knew like, oh man, I probably did not say that the right way. And so I she pulled out and I thought I better just text apology kind of explanation. And I just typed up like, hey, I do stand by what I said, but also I appreciate that wasn't the right moment to say that. And I was about to hit send. Something fell off. And I drug it over to AI and all I did was give it our Myers-Briggs profiles. And I said, can you just react to this before I send it? And it took the message and it did this. And it took the end and it made it the beginning and the beginning and it made it the end and it read so differently. Anyway, when I sent that one, she melted, and that just like never happened. And I sent the message that I would have needed, but she's the exact opposite on Myers-Briggs to me. And it helped me see, like, okay, there is value in interpretation and translation. It can translate English to English, but it needs the proper context to help.
Thanks, Mike.
I don't know if that's more than you wanted, Carol, but
And
No, but it's so
speaking
it doesn't feel like the time to end. Doesn't this feel like the time to just keep diving deeper and deeper and deeper? But Katie's going to make us.
yeah.
Yeah, speaking of context and prompt engineering for AI, Michelle shared earlier in the chat an article that Mike has authored that provides a five-step framework for how to use AI as a more efficient augmentation to your own thinking. So that just wanted to connect that dot there. But thank you all for joining us today. If you would like to continue the conversation on and continue exploring with us how to redesign your organization for greater performance and impact, we'd love to serve as your thought partner. There's two ways we can get in touch. You can scan the QR code, or I'm about to drop in the chat a couple links to either schedule a one-on-one meeting with a Tier 1 expert, or we have a organization alignment, effectiveness, and design jumpstart journey. It's about a 10-week sprint designed to equip your team with an operating model that accelerates value creation, very aligned to what we shared today. So thank you again for joining us. Please don't hesitate to reach out so we can keep chatting.